At this time of year, the hills around my farmhouse are always so quiet and still, just patiently waiting for spring. I've been doing some spring preparations myself, starting on my seedlings. I saved many seed pods from last year's Morning Glory plant. You're supposed to kind of clip them with like nail clippers and then soak them in water overnight. And look, there are already some green friends bursting out. These are moonflower seeds. I soaked them overnight, actually for like 24 hours because they're a little bigger. And then those are my sunflower seeds. And I also bought some new dahlia bulbs. Put out so many flowers throughout the season, but they look so crazy when you first plant them. They're just wild. It's exciting to get my summer garden started already. Some things for spring, and also I purchased some new things for spring from Target, so I thought I'd do a quick haul and share with you my spring decor. First of all, the tablecloth is brand new. I did find it at Target. They had such a cute fall tablecloth with pumpkins that I bought back in September or October, so it seemed very appropriate to have a new spring tablecloth as well. And I feel like it tones with the rug and the curtains, and just fun to have a new lovely pattern. And then these two, aren't they cute? So this is just a little woolen, I guess, felt leaf garland, which I kind of feel like it'd be cute over the bookshelves. I just don't know which bookshelf I'd put it over. Maybe I'll put it over a window instead. And then they had these cute terrariums, which this is actually, the plants are some of the succulents that I planted when Kate Howe came to visit in October. And originally I planted them in this. I found this at a flea market. Isn't it super cute? And it was $6, and I wanted to use it as a terrarium, so I did. But the fact that it has this lid made me also want to just use it as a normal receptacle. But Target had terrariums. This was $5 back in the fall when I was looking for like glass containers to make the terrariums in. I just found it so hard to find them. At Michael's they did have some, but they were super expensive. This was $5. It did have a little cork lid, which as you can see, it can't quite fit with the lid. But I hope that this guy, he seemed a little unhappy yesterday when I transplanted him, but he seems to have recovered somewhat. And I'm hoping this terrarium should be okay. Yeah, my other two terrariums that I made with Kate are still doing well. Everybody's alive. Actually, that's not true. I lost one plant. I think there were a couple of the succulents that didn't quite make it, but they do still look cute. And then what else do we have? These just were so cute and just looked so sort of happy and springtime-ish. And they, I feel like, match the curtain. I'm thinking maybe I'll put them draped from the window. This is not new, this is old. I bought this when I visited my cousin Becky last year. We went to Paper Source. They make these gorgeous, gorgeous wreaths. So I have two of them. There's one right there. And the other is right over here. And I'm very excited to have this daffodil one. I meant to make it last spring, but I visited Becky like in April, and when I came back, the daffodils had all just faded, so it felt like, oh, I should be making this when the daffodils are about to bloom. So I am going to finish it. I started curling some of the flowers there. You can see some of the petals. But I think it'll be very appropriate to finish this as the daffodils are just coming up outside. And then this little thing is the last item. Isn't that adorable? It would be super cute for an American Girl display. I think it would be like the perfect size for a little, I could put it on a little table, and then it would be just like a sort of shop stall, very cheerful spring booth for the American Girl dolls. And then I have been getting out some of my Easter decorations. This card is new. It was in one of the Neko Post subscription boxes. It's a stationery subscription from Japan that often is cat themed, because Neko means cat in Japanese. And I have been looking forward to their Sakura boxes for so long, because I knew they'd be spectacular. And I think that this was from, I guess this must have been from the February box, but I'm pretty sure I'll be getting the March box soon, and I'm sure it will also have spectacular Sakura. Yes, just fun to have some bright and cheerful springtime decorations out. I would try to dress in yellow and blue to match my pretty vase of daffodils right there. This is such a cute vase. It's shaped like a book. And I had never thought of doing this before until just now, when I was just trying to find space to get it in the frame. But how fun is it to like literally just put it on the shelf with all the rest of the books? I might have to leave it there and fill it up with some other flowers. These daffodils are from my mother's garden. I'm thinking I might try to convince her to narrate a little tour of her crescent moon garden, because so many of those plants are just at their peak in spring, and it looks so beautiful. My garden is still a bit bare, although I do have some bulbs coming up outside, and inside my seedlings have been coming along beautifully. It's so exciting to see them peeking up above the dirt. I've been doing some lovely spring reading this month, so I thought I would catch you guys up. No, don't go away, the sun. There's nothing too unexpected here, because I have pretty much been following my middle grade March TBR. It's always so fun to revisit favorite children's books, and I feel like they go so fast, especially compared to classics and other types of books I read. When I'm reading children's and middle grade books, it just goes so much quicker. You can just get through like a whole big pile in the same time it would take you to read one book, like say Anna Karenina, which I have not started yet. I finally got around to editing the Knowledge Cube unboxing that I filmed with my brother, Porthos. A lot of his books are currently in storage, so we got one of the Knowledge Cubes that they're stored in out and showed you guys what was inside. And it was so interesting to hear his thoughts on Anna Karenina. Unfortunately, I have never read it, so he very kindly encouraged me to borrow his beautiful copy. It's just so lovely. He said he read it from this as well, and it's just a fun book to read from. So I will be taking very good care of it and planning to start that very soon. I did finish Little House on the Prairie. I liked it so much that actually immediately after I finished it, I started on the banks of Plum Creek. But then I realized I had other children's books. So I'm about halfway through this. I am planning to continue with my reread of the whole Little House on the Prairie series this year. So I'm sure I will get back to this at some point. But this is really the classic where they set out in the covered wagon out to Indian territory. We've got the faithful Jack, the beloved dog, underneath the wagon. Just their resilience is so incredible, and the way they almost die about a dozen times. You know, there's a prairie fire around the house. There's a Native American camp really close by that's doing war chants. They all get struck down by fever, and none of them can even leave their beds, and their nearest neighbor, of course, is several miles away. When I read these as a kid, it didn't really strike me how incredibly dangerous it was. I feel like that strikes me more now. Back then it was just like, that is awesome. We went off on a little bit of a Little House tangent during our book club, and one person was saying how you really feel for Ma, because just as soon as they've got one house settled, Pa ups and, you know, they're moving out west, which I totally can sympathize. And yet I also sympathize with Pa's adventurous spirit. I somehow love his just get up and go, fearless attitude. He doesn't even have any nails, but he just settles down and builds them a beautiful house. I love how carefully he sands the floors to make sure that the little feet won't get any splinters. And after every life-threatening event, they just say, all's well that ends well. Like, the number of times they say that is amazing. And it really does give you like a reality check of like, the things I'm worried about are really not a problem. And all's well that ends well. I don't need to worry about it so much. Speaking of our book club, it was so fun to discuss Oscar Wilde's fairy tales with you guys. I totally didn't even realize there are at least two collections. There's The Happy Prince and Other Tales, and then there's also the pomegranate, something about a pomegranate. So I have to go back and read, find the second collection and check those out. It's always just such a treat to chat about books with you guys. I feel like I always see things in a new way or notice something that I didn't. One person was mentioning that the Nightingale and the Rose, that was one of the stories, which was very sad, but also just very evocative and symbolic and lyrical. It reminded them of Christ's Passion, which I can totally see. There are definitely Christian themes in the giant story. There's a very clear appearance by Christ, and I can totally see it in that story as well. And yet then you also have this unexpected humor of Wilde's thrown in, which is so wild and fun. We were chatting about Oscar Wilde and his style for a little bit, and I think we're going to read Picture of Dorian Gray in October. I have to figure out the books for the rest of the year. If you're interested in the book club and are not part of it yet, you can just send me an email, emma@bookishprincess.com, and I'll add you to the email list. I email out the video chat link every month, and it's a different book every month. At the beginning of the year, I planned out the first 6 months picks, but of course, we're already edging up towards June, so I gotta get the rest of the year figured out. So just as Little House on the Prairie was making me want to continue on with Plum Creek, Anne of Green Gables, as soon as I finished that, I was super tempted to just keep on reading Anne of Avonlea, but again, I was like, no, I have a bunch of other things. But it was just so charming to revisit this. It had been a while. I'd forgotten how much of the book is in Anne's voice. So many of the scenes, like, we don't actually see them, we hear Anne telling us about them. But of course, her voice is so enthusiastic and descriptive and plentiful. She always has plenty of words and plenty to say. This book takes place over 5 years, I think. And so you really see her grow up and see the place that she comes to hold at the Green Gables household. The characters are just so strong in this. You know, Marilla and Matthew and Anne and Diana, like they just pop off the page. And it is done so seamlessly that you almost forget how difficult it is to, you know, craft a character who's that strong. I did read Mandy by Julie Edwards, and I did enjoy it, but especially comparing it to, you know, some of the other books where I felt like the characters were really strong. The characters somehow didn't quite stand out as much to me in this, although it is still charming. It's about a little orphan girl named Mandy, and she ends up discovering a house, just an uninhabited, pretty little cottage, very close to the orphanage, and it's abandoned, and she ends up kind of adopting it as her own. You can tell from the cover, she plants lots of beautiful flowers. There is this theme of how she longs for a place of her own. I don't think she remembers her parents, so she's never really had a family of her own. So there is this source of sort of suspense because Mandy is so anxious to not let anyone find out about the cottage. Yeah, I wouldn't quite put this up on the same tier as some of the other children's classics, but I definitely did enjoy it. It's a very sweet premise. I also got to All of a Kind Family by Sydney Taylor. This is another one with sequels that are now on my list. This takes place in New York at the turn of the century, early 1900s, and you are amongst the immigrant families, the Jewish families on the Lower East Side. You have these 5 beautiful little girls and their mama and their papa, and they don't have much money, but they have so much fun. It's just beautiful to enter their world and to hear about how mama makes the chores interesting for them and how they carefully strategize how to spend their pennies. I love the scene with Gertie and the 2 little ones at the like candy store and the cracker store. I also love the Jewish festivals that are woven into the story because they are a devout Jewish family. So all of the different Jewish festivals throughout the year are really important to them. It made me think of The Chosen, actually, the film series about the life of Christ, which is absolutely excellent. Would highly, highly recommend it. It's 3 seasons in now, and it's totally free to watch online. I'll leave their website linked in the description. One of the things that they do a great job with is emphasizing the Jewish faith of Christ and his followers, because they were all faithful Jews. And it's really beautiful to see the Jewish prayers and the Jewish festival. One that I had never been super aware of is the one that takes place at the end of this book. I might not pronounce this correctly, but this festival, Sukkos, a Thanksgiving for the harvest lasting 9 days. A part of each of these days is spent in a specially built wooden hut, which is known as a sukkah. And in The Chosen, in one of the episodes, they build their own sukkah. And of course, these little girls build one, help their papa build one. Just an absolutely charming series. And yeah, The Chosen, if you're looking for something to watch during Lent. My family went to see the season 3 finale in theaters, which was really fun. I found it to be so moving. The way they interpreted that scene, and Peter is coming to this crisis, and I just thought that was absolutely amazing. And again, weaving in the Old Testament themes. They often start each episode of The Chosen with like a flashback to an Old Testament. And this psalm that they chose and the way it was then connected to what was happening in the episode was just so beautiful. I feel like my TBR videos and my wrap-up videos are not usually this much of a match, but I did a pretty good job. I did also read The Secret Language by Ursula Nordstrom. This is about 2 girls at a boarding school, Victoria North and Martha Sherman. I feel like this one almost did the best job of just capturing sort of childhood, because there is a little bit of an overarching storyline, but it is more about just vignettes and some things that the characters really look forward to that don't turn out, and then some surprises that they weren't expecting. It's quirky in this lovely, gentle way. Their house mother at first seems kind of ick and spick, but then it turns out she's pretty liebasa. The secret language words are a great addition to this. I also love when they end up speaking of making huts, they end up making a little playhouse for themselves. And Martha has befriended like the handyman, and he offers to make them a little pond. That was one of my favorite parts growing up. I wanted to make a little pond in our backyard. And I think we actually did attempt it. But then my dad got annoyed because mosquitoes were laying eggs there, so I don't think the pond lasted very long. But another part I love is the May Day basket, which is a fun tradition we've often done in my family. You know, when we were in school, we would take in little May Day bouquets for our teachers, or we'd leave them on the porch for our mom. Martha and Victoria end up making a May Day basket for their teacher, and they use a little mirror as a pretend pond in the basket. So it's almost like they recreated the little woods in the basket, and it just sounds so charming. Just so many great little interesting, funny, sweet vignettes. There are some great illustrations in this one. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little sneak peek of the costumes they wear to the Halloween party. Yeah, it's just really charming. And then what I've been getting through most recently, a reread of Little Women. I think when I last reread this, I reread most of the first part, but then I lost steam, and so I didn't finish. And actually I can tell because in this edition, I have like some things underlined and marked in the beginning, and then the further in you get, the fewer markings there are. I do prefer the first part. I feel like the second part becomes kind of painful, which if you know Little Women, you know why, but I'll give a little spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. Of course, they're growing up in the second part, so they're having all these different difficulties. You have the whole Joe-Laurie thing, which is just so agonizing because they're both such great characters. When Laurie proposes to Joe, it's just so sad. I mean, I feel like in the past, I was more on the side of people who like wish Joe just could have said yes. And yet, of course, you respect her, totally respect her for saying no because she doesn't love Laurie that way. But actually on this reread, I mean, Laurie during his proposal is very convincing, but especially the way he acts afterwards and even before. He is quite petulant and a bit selfish, and I don't know, I didn't have quite as much sympathy for Laurie on this reread. Maybe because I was so impressed by Professor Bear. I absolutely loved the scenes with him where Joe is living at the boarding house in the city. It's funny, we just finished hearing about Amy in Europe, and part of me wanted to hear more of Amy's travels and explorations in Europe, which we do come back around to Amy, but then it's like there's a little bit of a break as we go with Joe to the city. And there was one great passage I wanted to read you guys. One lovely thing about Little Women is how important faith is to all of these characters. I mean, it starts at the very beginning. Their Christmas presents are copies of Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, which it has always been on my list to read that. And after, I'm actually not quite finished with my reread of this quite yet, but I have already started listening to an audiobook of the LibriVox free version of Pilgrim's Progress. And I'm so glad I finally started it. It's really engaging. In the past when I picked it up, it didn't really grab me, but once you get into it, it's very story driven. In fact, the whole preface, because of course it was written before stories were the norm. In the preface, Bunyan kind of defends his choice of publishing this and says that, you know, he wants to let truth speak to people however it can. So anyway, to come back to Little Women, faith just pops up again and again and again. And sometimes it comes off as a bit moralistic, but like it also comes off as very sincere. And all the characters, even Amy, who's a bit full of herself and a bit selfish, there's this great scene at the fair, like where she really does try to love her neighbor as herself. And Professor Bear helps Joe realize that the sensation stories she was writing are really not the thing, which I know Louisa May Alcott did write sensation stories herself. Hopefully she also stopped writing them. But here's the passage that I thought was great. Joe and the professor are at this sort of intellectual soiree with lots of intellectual people. And Joe and Mr. Bear are kind of sitting in a corner. Presently several of the philosophers, each mounted on his hobby, came ambling up to hold an intellectual tournament in the recess. The conversation was miles beyond Joe's comprehension, but she enjoyed it, though Kant and Hegel were unknown gods. The subjective and objective unintelligible terms, and the only thing evolved from her inner consciousness was a bad headache after it was all over. It dawned upon her gradually that the world was being picked to pieces and put together on new and, according to the talkers, on infinitely better principles than before, that religion was in a fair way to be reasoned into nothingness, and intellect was to be the only god. Joe knew nothing about philosophy or metaphysics of any sort, but a curious excitement, half pleasurable, half painful, came over her as she listened, with a sense of being turned adrift into time and space, like a young balloon out on a holiday. She looked around to see how the professor liked it, and found him looking at her with the grimmest expression she had ever seen him wear. He shook his head and beckoned her to come away, but she was fascinated just then by the freedom of speculative philosophy and kept her seat, trying to find out what the wise gentleman intended to rely upon after they annihilated all the old beliefs. That is a very good question. Now, Mr. Bear was a diffident man, and slow to offer his own opinions, not because they were unsettled, but too sincere and earnest to be lightly spoken. As he glanced from Joe to several other young people attracted by the brilliancy of the philosophic pyrotechnics, he knit his brows and longed to speak, fearing that some inflammable young soul would be led astray by the rockets to find, when the display was over, that they had only an empty stick or a scorched hand. He bore it as long as he could, but when he was appealed to for an opinion, he blazed up with honest indignation and defended religion with all the eloquence of truth, an eloquence which made his broken English musical and his plain face beautiful. He had a hard fight, for the wise men argued well, but he didn't know when he was beaten, and stood to his colors like a man. Somehow, as he talked, the world got right again to Joe. The old beliefs that had lasted so long seemed better than the new. God was not a blind force, and immortality was not a pretty fable, but a blessed fact. She felt as if she had solid ground under her feet again. And when Mr. Bear paused, out-talked but not one whit convinced, Joe wanted to clap her hands and thank him. I just thought that was so beautiful. I guess maybe in every age it feels like the world is being picked apart by people who are trying to get rid of God, which is pretty hilarious idea that they even think such a thing can be accomplished. Hopefully there are also people like Professor Bear out there. It's funny, Little Women is still quite popular, and I feel like popular culture likes to just ignore their religion, sweep it under a rug, act like, you know, Louisa May Alcott didn't mean it. Or I don't know, maybe they're not reading the book and they're just watching the movie and seeing quotes on Instagram, and so they don't even realize that it's there. You can see even in that passage that, you know, yeah, sometimes there are the arguments against religion can be convincing. And Jo has her times when she, you know, is feeling despairing or is wishing that God had ordered things differently. But her faith in God is always the solid ground that she lands on, and the other characters as well. I feel like Jo is often held up as like a independent, you know, woman. And obviously she does value her independence, and she doesn't want to give it up to marry someone who she doesn't really love, like Laurie. But there is absolutely an acknowledgement in here that being a wife and mother, having a husband and children, is a fulfilling future. I think our present day culture is doing young women a real disservice in acting as if, you know, being a stay-at-home mom, you know, being a trad wife is like somehow a terrible thing. That is so demeaning to like the majority of womankind who have lived on this earth and who did all of this incredibly important and incredibly hard work at home, in the kitchen. Like I don't understand modern ways of thinking at all. The way modern ways of thinking try to twist classics to fit their mold. But when you go back and read the original, it's just beautiful to find that it is timeless. And the characters' faith made them unique and different from the people even in this time period. So I guess that's just how it is in every time period, because this world is not our home, and that is something that as a faithful Christian you have to remind yourself of. That's part of the point of Lent, the spiritual season we're in at the moment. I have been making progress in the Cloud of Unknowing, which I'm really enjoying. This is our Lenten read-along book, and we'll be discussing it April 16th. I have also been making progress in Paradise Regained, The Tradition and the Poem by Elizabeth Marie Pope, who is a children's author that I love, and this is one of the few other books by her that is out there. At first I found it a little bit dry, but after I got into it I thought it was really interesting, because the way John Milton, who wrote Paradise Regained, deals with Christ's temptation in the desert, Lent essentially, she kind of puts it in its context of how did people of his time interpret that part of the Gospels? Little questions like, were there actually only 3 temptations, or did the Gospel writers only mention 3 temptations and there were others? Milton has some very interesting other temptations, one with a banquet. After the temptations, the way he has the devil, I don't know if this is a spoiler, it's a biblical scene after the last of the temptations where the devil is telling Christ, cast yourself down and tell God's angels to catch you. Right after that, the devil himself is cast down, and the way Milton writes it is just this great dramatic scene. Milton really knows how to do drama. The way she puts it in the context of what other great religious thinkers of the time you know, had to say about that is really amazing. This is Holy Week, of course, leading up to Easter, so I am thinking I'll just focus on my more spiritual reads. I'd like to read, not the whole thing, but at least some of Hildegard of Bingen's visions. She's a saint, she's a doctor of the church, 12th century German nun, mystic, prophet, and political moralist. And then this is actually also, like Anna Karenina, from Porthos's library. I think I lost a little bit of the footage, not much of it, but I think there were maybe 3 or 4 books that we shared that I didn't realize the camera had stopped, which, oh good. Sometimes that happens where the camera has stopped filming and I'm just talking to a dead camera. But yeah, here's one of the books that you missed. It's Pascal, and I reread Pensée, which I absolutely loved. Pascal is a brilliant mathematician, but he also was a brilliant man of faith. And Pensée is his collection of basically his notes for this defense of faith, of the Christian faith that he was planning to write and just never got around to finishing it. But this edition, it looks like, does have Pensée and scientific treatises, but it also has provincial letters. And apparently Pascal was involved in some of the religious friction and arguments of the day, and he ended up writing these provincial letters, which were mentioned in the introduction of Pensée, and they just sounded so interesting that I think it really deepened his faith, the process of writing them. So I think it'd be really, really interesting to read those. I think that about covers my spring reads. I think I'll try to do a little blog post with some quotations as well, so that'll be over on my Substack. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Until then, I hope you have a blessed Holy Week and stay bookish. Bye.